We're down to 10 games remaining in what has been an absolutely dreadful Philadelphia 76ers season, but better days are on the horizon as we continue to root for losses to close out the season and maximize the Sixers' lottery chances. I want to break down why this draft pick could be so significant to linking a couple eras of Sixers basketball. Why do you think there has to be a pretty significant change in the thought process behind managing this actual draft pick from the Philadelphia 76ers perspective? So let's dive right into things. And as I mentioned, there are 10 games remaining in the Sixers regular season schedule. They will be in action tomorrow against the Washington Wizards, then against the Miami Heat, the Toronto Raptors, the New York Knicks, the Milwaukee Bucks, Minnesota Timberwolves, Miami Heat again, and then the final stretch of the season against the Wizards, against the Hawks, and against the Chicago Bulls. And that will be the final time we have to watch this version of this Sixers team before some serious questions are meant to be asked. Now, there are some pretty notable games in here. Obviously, we're watching the lottery with a pretty zeroed in lens on it at this point, and there are some fateful games. That tomorrow against the Wizards will be one that is notable, and to note, there is also a pretty significant game on the schedule between the Toronto Raptors and Brooklyn Nets, tipping off a half hour later in tomorrow's action, so make sure to keep an eye on that. And to dive into the exact lottery odds perspective for what we're keyed in on right now, the Wizards continue to hold the worst record in the NBA. Don't think anybody is surpassing them for that, although Utah Jazz are giving their best chance. The Charlotte Hornets, the third worst record, and then here is where the mix that the Sixers sit in. They did lose to the Pelicans most recently. Pelicans are 20-53 on the year. The Sixers still sitting 3.5 games above them at 23-49. I think it is unlikely that they can drop below the New Orleans Pelicans, although Zion Williamson is back on the floor and looks phenomenal during the stretches of the out there for a couple different reasons, with Zion's health in mind and, of course, prioritizing these lottery odds in the same way. New Orleans being very careful with how often he is rolled out, so I wouldn't bank on him playing a ton of minutes or playing even in a ton of games to close out the season, but still worth noting there. Then, of course, there are the Sixers, who are currently tied with the Brooklyn Nets, each holding 23-49 records on the season, which is why tomorrow's matchup is so significant. And once again, right above them, there is the Toronto Raptors at 25-47. So to reflect on tomorrow's schedule as well, shout out to Sixers Justin for tweeting this, who's been crushing it on Twitter lately. You can see both these games are going on obviously the same day and a half hour apart, and we'll have some pretty key implications on the overall lottery odds. Now, we've talked plenty about the actual concept of this Sixers team actually having a chance at getting their draft pick back, an unforeseen circumstance on this overall season, but I did want to reflect on why that is so important for this Sixers team. That they are a team that has sold their soul for this 3-star tactic, that they got 3 max contract, which is difficult to juggle from a salary cap perspective. Of course, with Joel Embiid, and we will touch on him a little bit more in a second, Paul George, and probably just as concerning of an outlook when we're talking about him, and then Tyrese Maxey in that third max slot there. That is the bulk of their salary for the next couple years. So that is why it is so especially important to connect and add a high-level young talent, because it is cheaper on the books. You can maximize your contracts. A guy like Jared McCain is a perfect example of a player that is going to be a win-now talent contributing at a low price point from the salary cap perspective. They now have a chance to add another one of those players if the ping pong balls fall their way, and they do have a chance to keep their overall draft pick. And by the way, to reflect on the exact odds here, they currently split with the Brooklyn Nets for the 5th and 6th seed. This has a 39.9% chance at it being a top 4 pick, a 9.8% chance at that number 1 pick there, and the exact difference between the 5th and 6th seed when everything is said and done at the end of the season, it goes from either a 64% chance of keeping the pick or a 46% chance of keeping the pick. And if for some reason when the season winds all the way down that they have the exact same record, it basically is decided by a straight up coin flip for who has increased lottery odds. Do wish there was a bit of a better system in place for that, but nonetheless, this all comes down to randomness and lottery, and that's what we're going to have to hang our hat on. Now, we've talked a lot about that concept specifically. To give the big picture of it as well, we do have to kind of acknowledge the brutal reality that the Joel Embiid era is winding down. And while I'm not ready to throw in the towel that this guy can't contribute on a Sixers team next season, that obviously there are a lot of medical questions that need to be answered and ones that we haven't heard any semblance from. The Embiid outlook is pretty concerning, at by far the most concerning point that we've hit any stretch of his career, and that is saying something, as we've lived through the ups and downs of Joel Embiid, and a lot has been made about his lack of availability this year. Obviously, he missed a ton of games, but when he was on the floor was frankly more concerning to me. And to address exactly what that was. By his standards, these are not the numbers you want to see from an MVP candidate caliber player, a guy that, when he is right, is one of the 5 best basketball players in the entire world. Last season, 23.8 points per game, 8.2 rebounds, 4.5 assists, shot just 44.4% from the field, 29.9% from 3, on the north side of 30 at 31 years old at this point. The mobility was clearly a factor. Defensively, he was a shell of himself, and these are all issues. And that is why I present this with this concept that the thought process that must change within the Sixers organization is this draft pick must be made independently of Joel Embiid. If the best player on the board when the Sixers have their pick, and Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper, you name the top dogs and they're off there, if the best player is a center, you still take him if you're the Sixers. And I do want to dive into a couple of who those names are, kind of give the elevator pitch for what these guys could bring to a team at this point. So to pull up a mock draft, and I do think now is particularly the good time to do this as we are in the heart of March Madness and can see a lot of these guys competing this weekend. So Cooper Flagg, the clear-cut number 1 overall pick, a guy who, whichever team earns that top spot, will be selecting him there. A game-changing talent. A guy that, frankly, the more that I've watched him this year, the more encouraged that I've been. He's not as flashy as you sort of expect from one of these, face of the league caliber of talents that he is marketed as, but he's a winning basketball player, man. He does the little things. He's super competitive. I'm a big fan of Cooper Flagg. I liked him coming into the season, even more impressed after giving a sample size at Duke. Then, of course, back-to-back, there are the 2 Rutgers guys, Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. Did have a chance with my guy Ryan on the channel here to go up and check them out, watch play live in person this year. I came away, or I'll say I entered that game a little bit more skeptical of Ace Bailey. The book on him, he's a tough shot taker, a tough shot maker. There is a little Kevin Durant into him, and obviously he's not to that caliber of a scorer yet. But there are some limitations in the overall, skill set. The shot selection is going to need to be cleaned up. Well, what really stood out to me, seeing him in person, the work rate is there. The dude competes. And I do think that is a guy that I have as a pretty notable fit for the Sixers there. If Ace Bailey is on a board, that's a guy that I could see playing next to Joel Embiid, as well as being a guy that can extend the era, be another version or another key player in the post-Joel Embiid era. Dylan Harper, very impressed with him as a talent. I don't fully see the fit in a Sixers uniform because of Jared McCain and Tyrese Maxey there. He is a ball-dominant guard. He's a professional guard, man. That guy knows how to play basketball, knows how to create for others, knows how to get his own shot. He's very good. He will be successful where he lands. At 4, VJ Edgecombe out of Baylor. Love VJ Edgecombe, man. This guy is being viewed as sort of a consolation prize, and I think that's pretty offensive to him. This guy is the real deal talent, probably the best athlete out of this entire top 13 that I'm showing on the board now. And the thing that I'll say about Edgecombe, I don't think he's figured out how good he fully is yet. That it's still kind of coming to terms with, when I take guys off the dribble or try and beat them with my first step, I can beat them just about every single time. Now, that's not exactly going to fly at the NBA level, but I'm pretty encouraged with this skill set and just want to throw that out there. A pretty pure shooting guard, I would say. Trey Johnson, a little bit more combo guard. This is a guy that can catch absolute fire. Broke a bunch of Kevin Durant scoring records at Texas, which is quite impressive to do. I'm not the biggest Trey Johnson guy, but I certainly see the talent there. He's a score-first type player, can get absolutely red hot, which is probably his biggest calling card as a player, so just want to throw that out there. At number 6, Kasparis Giannakoulis here. I thought early on in the season that this was going to be one of my guys that I was riding for. The more the season progressed, the more that I kind of got a sample size of watching him play. Don't quite feel the same way, that there were far too many games watching him at Illinois that he kind of just disappeared for stretches, which is really concerning to me. But he's got real deal size at 6'6", very skilled as a guard and more of a complimentary type talent, a good connector within the flow of the offense, and can get his, of course. So not ruling him out, but just to make note there. Then Con Kneppel at number 7, another Duke product here, a guy that can absolutely shoot the lights out of the basketball here. He's not quite in that like JJ Redick, Grayson Allen type Duke guard there, but he's pretty close to it. That he's going to be a high volume 3-point shooter at the NBA level. There's a little bit more to him than that. Decent size at 6'7", pretty quick release. He's going to be a shooter. He's going to be one of these guys that is going to make a living in the NBA as a high volume 3-point shooter. Then at 8, Jeremiah Fears, who's been a late climber here, a guy that I'm quite intrigued by. I believe he's still 18 years old. Yep, I can see it on here. 18.7 years old, a freshman, went to Oklahoma. The burst that he has with the ball in his hand is quite impressive, and he can create space in a way that is pretty cool, but pretty impossible to stop, certainly at the collegiate level, and I think it plays incredibly young, still early in his development. That's more of a long-term project, but the talent is going to be there. Asa Newell here out of Georgia. kind of the polar opposite of fears in a way, that I think he's fairly polished as a player. There's certainly more that he can grow into, but my biggest pushback or concern about him specifically, I don't quite see that second gear or that top gear that he can get to really be one of these top players in the NBA. I think he's going to be a very good player for a long time, but not a guy that ever kind of reaches that peak, which does have me a little bit concerned. And frankly, when I ultimately settle on my rankings here, we'll have him a decent bit lower than this. No disrespect or hate to him. He's a Monteverde Academy type guy, has the pedigree, a good player, but I just don't quite see the top end compared to some of these other guys. Jace Richardson out of Michigan State, a complete guard, a combo guard, a guy that can get his playmake for others at a decent rate, certainly a score first guy. His dad, obviously, Jason Richardson, that went to Michigan State, had a successful career, actually played for the Sixers for a stretch there. An interesting piece, another guy that I don't see a clear fit on the Sixers for, but the talent is there. 11, a guy that will fire me up here. Kamin Maluak out of Duke here. Really, I don't want to put the Joel Embiid comp on him, but there are some similarities in their past here. This guy that started playing basketball late in his career, and I would describe his kind of approach to the game at this point as sort of inquisitive here, that he's figuring out on an every game basis the things that he can do, what works when on a basketball court, and there is some legitimate touch in his game. He's real deal 7'2". He can do the basic center things of setting screens, rolling to the basket, catching lobs, blocking shots, all those type of things. But I've been impressed. He started to take threes lately. He's got a little bit of mid-range touch. Whenever I see that type of touch in a big man, that is not easy to teach, man, and he's got it. So when you factor in how young he still is, hasn't turned 19 yet, the lack of wear and tear on his body, that he's still learning basketball, I think there's a lot of untapped potential. And even if you don't get to that potential, the version of him currently is going to be a playable, successful NBA player. So I think when everything is said and done, this guy probably climbs up certainly into the top 6 picks there. Would not shock me if he ends up a top 4 type of guy. I like Maluak a lot there. Nolan Traore, don't know a ton about, to be perfectly honest. The only international guy kind of in this top mix. I will do my homework on him as it gets closer, but I did also want to highlight at 13, Derek Queen out of Maryland. We all saw the shot that he hit to advance Maryland over Colorado State, the lone buzzer beater that we've gotten of March Madness. This is another guy who's got my attention. That I've started off a little bit of a Derek Queen skeptic here, but I love the way that he plays, man. A cool personality. And I do think that there is something to a guy like Maluak or Queen that could play with Joel Embiid or without him. And that is something that I do think is really intriguing there, that you can kind of battle. That would be my ideal target, a Queen or a Maluak type. And why I say that is because you already have your foundation of guards in Maxey and McCain. I don't want to be forgot how good Jared McCain was for this Sixers team in the brief stretch that we did see him. And what exactly he produced last year: 15.3 points per game, 2.4 rebounds, 2.6 assists, shot 38.3% from 3, only 21 years old, still a lot of growing to do, but he's a guy that is bought into this Steph Curry book of basketball. And when you think about that in general, like the guy that's gotten a lot of those comps, like Trae Young is to an extent that he'll shoot from the logo, he'll pull up from deep, but what Trae Young never embraced, and we already can clearly see in Jared McCain, it is the off-ball motion. It is the willingness as a shooter off the catch, and stuff that you never see with Trae, that I think McCain is the first clear example of buying into every part of the book of Curry for how you process basketball, and I cannot wait to see him flourish in Philadelphia with those same factors. So when you have two foundational guards with Tyrese Maxey and with Jared McCain, if you can add a third piece to this, a third legitimate long-term prospect that could grow into an all-star caliber talent, you have something here. That trio is something that could push beyond the Joel Embiid era, and I also think there is very much a world where that is the core carrying this team for the short term or throughout a regular season, and then Embiid could be a potential like finishing touch that does make them a real deal contender. We are getting a little bit ahead of ourselves as there's a lot still to go down, a lot of I's to dot and T's to cross before we even see if they have access to this pick. But if they can save this top 6 pick, these are all guys that I think could have a really positive role on the future of the Sixers franchise. And I do think that it is necessary for them to pull in one of those to have a chance at keeping this window to win open. Still a lot to go down until this point, but did want to highlight some of those names, particularly ahead of these final stretches of the tournament. You can see each of these guys still ready to take place in it, or several of them at least, that you can see Derek Queen, Kamin Maluak, keep an eye on him, Cooper Flagg, of course, Con Kneppel as well. A bunch of these guys, Jace Richardson still in it, Michigan State still hanging. There's a lot of talent still on the in the NCAA tournament that I do think is worth keeping an eye on. For the first time in quite some time, that we should be zeroed in on the NBA draft prospects, and I will be doing my homework, put my gloves on and digging deep into each what these guys bring from a basketball perspective. So be ready to stay tuned for that, but did want to hop on and give some initial takeaways from each of these guys, and do want to hear from you guys in the comments. Are there any of those names that are standing out to you? And I do think it would be remiss if I did not mention that one of the other effects of the season season is getting a chance to see some of these young talents. And a guy like Justin Edwards has absolutely shined of late. That is a player that I see a long-term bright future at the NBA level, pretty much a carbon copy of what you look for in a 3-and-D style of player in today's NBA. And boy, he looks more and more confident with every given game. That was a guy who was expected to have a pretty clear path to being a top 5 pick in last year's draft. Things did not go well for him in Kentucky, and we should be grateful that that is the case as things are clicking at the NBA level. So shout out to Justin Edwards, and a perfect opportunity that he sort of stumbled into this year. Hopefully better opportunities for this entire Sixers team next season as they have a little bit more talent and more cohesive unit in fold, but we will see what happens when it gets to that point. Once again, do want to hear from you guys in the comments. Which of those prospects particularly jump out to you? Is it Trey Johnson, and am I selling him short? Is it Derek Queen? Do you see the vision? Common Malawak, give your names, give your takes below. We'll be back talking to you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.